Hello dear students, I welcome you for this 8th lecture of chapter number 2, that is ecosystem. I, Mr. Amol Handore, is working as assistant professor at Department of Zoology, KTHM College Nasik. In today's lecture, we are going to deal with ecological pyramids. In previous lecture, we have studied food chain, different types of the food chain like grazing food chain and detritus food chain. Then we understood the concept of food web and we have studied the significance of food chain and food web in ecosystem. The study objective of today's lecture will be introduction to ecological pyramids, then types of ecological pyramids, significance, advantages and disadvantages of these ecological pyramids, and finally we will deal with energy flow in an ecosystem. So what is a pyramid? You must have seen these very well constructed pyramids of Giza of Egypt. So these are the architectural marvel which were created by the Egyptians in prehistoric times. Now our topic of discussion is ecological pyramids, which are different than these pyramids, but they have a shape of similar to these pyramids. That's why we call them as ecological pyramids. So these ecological pyramids are take into consideration number of organisms, biomass of the organisms, or energy of the ecosystem. So if we can define an ecological pyramid as a graphical representation of trophic structure and function of an ecosystem. It always starts with producers at the base and the successive trophic levels forms the apex. Such structure is called as ecological pyramid. Now in last lecture we have understood what is meant by trophic levels. So these are nothing but the feeding positions in an food chain. So such positions like primary producers, then we have herbivores, and then different types of carnivores like primary, secondary and tertiary or even quaternary carnivores or consumers. Now this concept of ecological pyramid was put forward by Charles Elton in the year 1925. That's why these ecological pyramids are also termed as Eltonian pyramids. In this picture, we can see a typical ecological pyramid which have many layers. The basal layer is made up of, always it is made up of producers. Then you have primary consumers, secondary consumers, tertiary level consumers, and sometimes even quaternary level consumers or even the decomposers. Now this is an example of a energy pyramid where you can see the energy, ultimate source of energy is sun. At each level the energy is lost and some amount of energy is transferred to the next trophic level. Now let's see the different types of pyramids. So in ecosystem there are three basic types of pyramids which are present, that is pyramid of number, pyramid of biomass and pyramid of energy. So let's study each type one by one. So first we will study the pyramid of number. So by definition, the pyramid of number means number of organisms in food chain which can be represented graphically in a form of pyramid. So in this last diagram we have seen that there were different bars and each bar represents number of individuals at each trophic level of the food chain. And we have seen that there are large number of organisms at the base, those are called as producers, and there are lower number of organisms at the higher trophic level, which are the carnivores. Now this pyramid of number can be upright or inverted. So what is the meaning of this? We will see in the next slide. So shape of this pyramid varies from type of ecosystem to the another ecosystem. And maximum number of individual occur always at the producer level. Now these producers prepare the food on which herbivores are dependent. So these producers will feed the herbivores, and then in turn these herbivores are eaten by the carnivores. So herbivores are eaten by primary carnivores, then you have secondary consumers, and on the top of the pyramid you have the top carnivores or the tertiary consumers, which are very few in number. Now let's understand this concept of pyramid of number with the help of a diagram. So in this diagram we can see there are two types of ecosystem, that is grassland ecosystem and pond ecosystem. Now if we see in an grassland ecosystem, the base is formed by the producers in the form of grasses. So these grasses are very large in number, so this base is larger. Now these grasses are eaten by the herbivores, which are also called as primary consumers. So number of these primary consumer is obviously less than number of grasses. That's why this level or of the pyramid is smaller than the producer level. Now these herbivores like rabbits, crickets, grasshoppers or rats, these are eaten by the secondary consumers, which we also call them as carnivores. So these may be in the form of snakes, lizards, or even foxes or other higher mammals. So this is the third level of this pyramid. Now these consumers, they are less in number than the carnivores, or rather these secondary consumers are less in number than the herbivores or the primary consumers. That's why this level of the pyramid is still smaller. Now the secondary consumers are eaten by tertiary consumers, which are the top predators. So suppose these snakes are eaten or these lizards are eaten by the bird of prey, that is eagle or hawk. So these animals are still less in number. So as you see, the shape of the pyramid goes on decreasing as you go from bottom to the apex. So that's why it gives a shape that is quite similar to the pyramid. Similarly, if we see a pond ecosystem, there are many producers in the form of phytoplanktons. Now these phytoplanktons and algae are eaten by the primary consumers or the herbivores. So these can be zooplanktons or smaller fishes. These primary consumers are eaten by the secondary consumers, which can be in the form of larger fishes or other echinoderms, and these secondary consumers are eaten by the top consumers. So in both grassland ecosystem as well as pond ecosystem, the pyramid of number is upright. So this is called as a upright pyramid. Sometimes you can have another shape of the pyramid of number, that is called as spindle shaped pyramid of number. So let's first see the diagram. So this is called as a spindle shaped pyramid. Now if we study a typical forest ecosystem, there are very few big trees. So these big trees are the producers in a forest ecosystem, and they form the narrow base. So in this picture you can see the trees of an forest ecosystem. They are few in number, so we have drawn this as a narrow from this end. Now these trees act like food to many herbivores. So many birds or other herbivorous animals like insects, they feed onto the trees. So they form the second layer of this forest ecosystem. Now these herbivores are abundant in forest ecosystem. That's why this base, or rather this level of the pyramid, is quite broader. Followed by you have secondary consumers like fox, snake, lizards, which are still less in number than the herbivores. Therefore, the uppermost strata of the pyramid of number is quite smaller. So in this picture you can see the top consumers like lions, tiger or other animals, they are very few in number compared to the herbivores. So the upside of this pyramid is also quite tapering or constricted. So from both the side it is tapering or constricted, and only at the middle it is quite broad. So such shape of the pyramid is called as a spindle shaped pyramid, and that is found in the forest ecosystem. Sometimes you will also find third type of pyramid, that is called as inverted shaped pyramid. So what is mean by inverted shaped pyramid? This is normally found in a parasitic food chain. So parasitic food chain show this third type of pyramid, that is inverted shaped pyramid. So in this pyramid, we will see this picture first. So this is a typical inverted shaped pyramid which is found in the parasitic food chain. So here the producers are few in number, so it forms the tapering base. Now these will give food to many consumers. So these consumers will be in the form of herbivores. Different insect species could be there which are dependent on these trees. So these are primary consumers, and these primary consumers are food for the secondary consumers. Now there would be various varieties of birds or other animals which feed onto the insects. There could be lizards or as well, or other reptiles. So therefore the secondary consumers are very large in such ecosystem. Therefore the shape of the pyramid is like a inverted pyramid. So these producers are trees which are eaten by the insects. So you have the larger insects on the top. These insects are further eaten by the other herbivores. So you have the more number of these birds or other predatory animals on the top layer. So that's why this shape of the pyramids is like inverted pyramid. We can take another example like producers in the form of trees on which fruit eating birds act like herbivores. Now they are more in number than the trees. So the second layer of the pyramid is larger. Now there are different types of parasites present on these birds. So these can be in the form of lice, other bugs. So they are more in number than the birds. So the third layer of the pyramid is more broad. Then feeding onto these bugs and lice, there could be parasites of these which are called as hyperparasite, which feed onto the bugs and lice. So these could be in the form of microorganisms. So these microorganisms are still larger in number. So the shape of the pyramid in such parasitic food chain also is inverted in shape. Okay, so I hope you have understood what is meant by inverted pyramid, in which the number of organisms at the producer level are less and the number of organisms at the top consumers are more in number. That's why the shape becomes tapering at the bottom and broad at the top. So this is called as inverted pyramid. Now let's see The advantages and disadvantages of this ecological pyramid of number. First of all, very important advantage is it is very simple and easy method. So it gives a complete overview of typical ecosystem or food chain. Second advantage, it is good for comparing changes in the ecosystem at different times of the year as well as seasonal changes. So for comparing the seasonal changes of the year, this is the very simple method which is called as pyramid of number. Now there are some disadvantages of this pyramid of number. First of all, numbers of specific species can be too great to measure accurately. We cannot measure all the number of organisms at each level. We cannot count all the trees and ecosystem, or we cannot count all the insect in an ecosystem. Secondly, that second advantage is that it does not take into account juvenile or immature forms. That means the immature stages of the organisms are not taken into consideration while building the pyramid of number. Third disadvantage is that all organisms are included regardless of their size, hence sometimes it may become inverted. Okay, so this pyramid of number, you can see the upright pyramid as well as the inverted pyramid. Also you find the third type, that is spindle shaped pyramid. So these are the advantages and disadvantages of pyramid of number. Now we come to the second type of pyramid, which is called as pyramid of biomass. So as like in pyramid of number, we have counted number of the organism at each level. That means producer and consumer level, or the carnivore, that is primary, secondary and tertiary consumer level. Here we will take the biomass. So first of all, we should understood what is mean by biomass. So biomass is calculated by this formula in which we take mass of each individual and we multiply it with number of individual at each trophic level. So for example, I have 100 trees and each tree has a weight of 10 kilogram. So I will multiply 100 into 10. So that will give me the biomass for 100 trees. So let's see the definition of pyramid of biomass. So pyramid of biomass is very simply called as graphical representation that gives the picture, that means depicts the biomass which is present per unit area at different trophic levels of ecological system, and it is based upon the total biomass, that is dry matter at each trophic level in the food chain. So as we have seen that pyramid of number is upright or inverted, here also the pyramid of biomass can be upright or inverted, but you do not see the spindle shaped pyramid in pyramid of biomass. So let's first see the picture. So this is the upright pyramid of biomass and this is the inverted pyramid of biomass. This upright pyramid of biomass is seen, for example, in grassland ecosystem, and this inverted pyramid is seen in the aquatic ecosystem. So let's study the first, that is upright pyramid. So the pyramid of biomass in forest ecosystem is upright. So this position is, remember, this position is called as upright position, which is similar to your pyramid. So here producers, that means trees. In forest we have large number of trees which are producers. So they have the large biomass. So that's why, since these trees have large biomass, your base will be broader. So all trees, their weight will be obviously very large. So suppose, for example, in a forest ecosystem, these producers have a weight of 1000 kilogram. Now the herbivores are feeding onto these trees and other plants. So they will form the second layer of this pyramid. But obviously, the weight of the herbivores is less than the producers, so this become smaller in size than the base. Now these herbivores are eaten by the carnivores, so this layer also become very small, and these, because the secondary consumers are less than the herbivores, and we have very few number of the top carnivores like lion, tigers, which eat these primary carnivores. They will be having less weight. So obviously, the if we go weight wise, the pyramid will become constricted at the top. So it has a broad base and narrow top. So in forest ecosystem, you always have a broad base and a narrow top. On the other hand, if we see this pyramid of biomass in aquatic ecosystem, it shows exactly opposite. That is, it is inverted. So what is mean by inverted pyramid of biomass? The total number of producers in a pond or any aquatic ecosystem are less, or their weight is less rather, though they are very large in number. But suppose the producers in a pond ecosystem is in the form of phytoplanktons. If we take the weight of all the phytoplanktons in a pond, it will be very less because they are very small in size, microscopic, so their weight will be very less. Now these phytoplanktons are eaten by the herbivores, herbivorous fishes or zooplanktons or other insects. So obviously these second strata organism weight will be more, so this will become broader, and these herbivorous fishes or animals will be eaten by the larger fishes. Now these larger fishes will be more large in size, their weight will be more, so this will also become broader. Okay, so this is based on the weight which is present at each level. So in the producer level the weight will be less, in the herbivores level it is intermediate, and the top predator level the weight of animals will be more, so this will become broader. That's why the pyramid of biomass in aquatic ecosystem is always inverted. That means it is exactly opposite to the upright. Here you can see the comparison of the upright pyramid and the inverted pyramid. Now let's study the advantages and disadvantages of pyramid of biomass. First of all, it overcomes all the problems of pyramid of number. So whatever disadvantages which were present in pyramid of number are overcome by the pyramid of biomass. However, the disadvantages of pyramid of biomass is that it is very difficult to obtain the data of the weight of organism, because to get the actual weight of organism you need to kill them, and then you have to get the weight of those organisms, which is not possible. It only uses sample from the population, so it is important to measure biomass exactly. Okay, so if you are taking samples, obviously you will not get the representation of entire population of that particular ecosystem. Also, the time of the year will also play a very important role. So time of the year, accordingly the biomass will vary, and that will also decide the shape of the pyramid. So the shape of the pyramid would depend on the season. So these are the disadvantages of pyramid of biomass. Now we come to the last type of pyramid of energy. So pyramid of energy, we can define it as the graphical representation or model of energy flow in a community. The different level represent different group of organisms in the food chain, which are nothing but the trophic levels of the food chain. So pyramid of energy is always upright. In previous two types we have seen it can be upright or inverted, but pyramid of energy is always upright because it is dependent on the second law of thermodynamics, which states that energy is transferred or transformed more and more, or if it is wasted. So let's study this pyramid of energy. So it is based on the amount of energy trapped per unit time and area at different trophic level of the food chain. So first of all, we'll see this diagram. The ultimate source of energy for any ecosystem is nothing but the sunlight. So the sunlight is trapped by the organisms which are present at this level, that is primary producers. So producers are nothing but the different plants or algae or fungi. So they will have the mechanism of photosynthesis and they produce their own food. So we also call them as autotrophs. Now these primary producers are eaten by the herbivores. So we call them as primary consumers. But is it possible that all energy will be transferred from primary producers to consumers? No. Only about 10% of the energy is transferred at each trophic level. So suppose there is 10,000 joule energy present in the plants, only about 1000 joule energy transferred to the primary consumers, that is herbivores. Now these herbivores are eaten by the secondary consumers. Here also the energy is lost. That energy is lost for the different metabolic activity like respiration, reproduction and other physiological activities, and very little amount of energy is given to the next trophic level. So the secondary consumers will get very less energy, so they will have to eat many animals or many herbivores. Now these secondary consumers are eaten by the tertiary consumers. Here also there will be loss of energy, only 10% energy. So out of 10, 100 joule, only 10 joule will be transferred to the tertiary consumers. So you can see at each stage the energy is lost. So about 90% of energy is lost at each trophic level. So we'll come back to this. So this pyramid of energy gives the representation of trophic relationship and it is always upright. So we can see this, it is always upright. Even we can see this next diagram, that this pyramid, the energy always goes on decreasing from producers to the top consumers. Okay, always energy is going to decrease, that's why it is upright. So 90% of energy is lost at each trophic level in the form of heat and respiration, and only 10% energy passes from one trophic level to the next trophic level. So in this example we have seen that only 10% energy is given to the primary consumers, then only 10% of these is transferred to the secondary consumers, and so on. So if we see the advantage and disadvantages of this pyramid of energy, so in short we can say that this pyramid of energy shows the energy flow in a particular ecosystem, and at each trophic level the energy goes on decreasing. So only 10% of energy is transferred to the next trophic level and 90% of energy is lost in the form of heat or other. Now we will see the importance of these ecological pyramids. Why to study these ecological pyramids? Because they give the information of feeding of different organisms in different ecosystems. So what are the food preferences of different organisms? It also shows the efficiency of energy transfer, at least how much energy is transferred from one trophic level to the next trophic level, and the condition of ecosystem can be monitored to prevent any further damage. Okay, so this is the importance of ecological pyramids. Now there are some limitations of all these ecological pyramids, that these ecological pyramids assumes, okay, so this is a hypothetical concept. These ecological pyramids is a hypothetical concept because it assumes simple food chain, but it is not so. in the nature we do not have a simple food chain, but we have the food webs. So this ecological pyramid does not consider the food web, but it considers the food chain. It does not take into account the same species belonging to two or more trophic levels. This is the another disadvantage or limitation of these ecological pyramids. Now we come to the last part of today's discussion, that is energy flow in an ecosystem. For any ecosystem, the ultimate source of energy is the sun, and flow of energy in any ecosystem takes place always through the food chain. So this energy flow is basically responsible for the survival of that ecosystem, and this energy flow is always unidirectional. It cannot be the other way. That means from producers to the herbivores and then to the carnivores. And we know that sun is the ultimate source of energy, so by which the producers make their food with the help of photosynthesis process. And like nutrients undergo recycling, you have different cycle, carbon, nitrogen and phosphorus cycle, by which nutrients again recycle back to the food chain. However, energy is not recycled in the food chain. So energy is never reused in the food chain. It is always flowing in single direction, that is unidirectional flow of energy. So to understand this energy flow in ecosystem, we should know the laws of thermodynamics. So the first law of thermodynamics says that energy can neither be created nor be destroyed, but it can be transformed from one form to the another. And sun is the always ultimate source of energy for the ecosystem. Solar energy captured by these green plants, which are producers, is converted to biochemical energy, that means the food of the plant. So by the process of photosynthesis, they convert these, they use CO2 plus H2O in the presence of sunlight and chlorophyll pigment. They produce the glucose as the food source. And this food source is the ultimate source of energy for the other organisms in the food chain. Those are called as consumers. Now the second law of thermodynamics states that energy dissipates as it is used, or in other words, it gets converted from more concentrated to dispersed form. That means as energy flows through the food chain, there occurs dissipation of energy. That means most of the energy is lost at each trophic level. So we have studied the pyramid of energy, where we have seen 90% of energy is lost and only 10% of energy is transferred to the next trophic level. So this loss of energy takes place in the form of respiration, heat, in different processes of organism like locomotion, running, hunting and other activities. So every organism is doing different activities, and during this the energy is lost. That's why we say that not 100% energy is transferred, but 90% energy is lost and only 10% energy is transferred to the next trophic level. So 90% energy is lost and only 10% energy is transferred to the next trophic level. So in this pyramid we can see this 100% to 10%. From primary consumers only 10% of 10% is 1%. Now 10% of 1% is 0.1% and 10% of 0.1% is 0.01%. So from the producers to the top carnivores, the amount of energy, only 10% energy is transferred. So with this we conclude today's lecture. In today's lecture we have understood what are ecological pyramids, the three types of ecological pyramid, that is pyramid of number, pyramid of biomass and pyramid of energy. We studied their advantages and disadvantages. In the last part we studied the limitations of these ecological pyramids, significance of these pyramids, and finally we studied the energy flow in an ecosystem, where the sun is the ultimate source of energy and we studied the two laws of thermodynamics which are responsible for the energy flow in ecosystem, which states that most of the energy is lost and only 10% energy is transferred from one trophic level to the next trophic level. So with this we conclude today's lecture on ecological pyramids. In next lecture we will study eutrophication process in lakes and ponds. So thank you for your patience hearing.